Welcome back everybody, I am Follygon and we are on day 11 for Sculptober. If you are just joining us here on day 11, there are 10 more days of sculpting that you can go check out. I'll put some links down in the description for you guys if you want to check out the rest of them. If you're new around here, click that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my courses, brushes, and materials. Today's prompt is shrink, and for that, what better shrinking character than Alice from Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. I found this really cute chibi art style of Alice from Ibu-chan over on Instagram, and I thought it would make a great character for today's sculpt. For the most part, this one has some pretty simplistic shapes, so I wanted to focus on some of the process for adjustments a little bit more. I've talked about how we're going to focus in on kind of different ideas, different concepts with each Sculptober video, and this one is more about kind of that middle gray area, which I think for a lot of people can be really tough. You start to get the block out done, you have a lot of the stuff in there and you're kind of ready to go, but after that, what do? How do you kind of go from one stage to the next? Well, a lot of that is very dependent on what your goals are. For instance, if you are attempting to replicate a 2D artwork and translate it to 3D as best as you can, which is what I do professionally for my work, then you need to practice your ability of observation. Observation is definitely one of the most important parts of art. It is a combination of a lot of things, including not just your ability to see what something actually looks like, which sounds a little silly if you're not someone that's in the art community or does a lot of art, but I promise it's a thing. If you've ever looked back at artwork that you've created, years ago, then you often see those cases where your ability to see has definitely improved. If your goal is to just sculpt or draw whatever it is from the imagination, then your ability of observation is a little bit different. You're not directly observing one thing. I recommend that you're grabbing references from real life, from all sorts of places to use as inspiration, shape language, color, all sorts of stuff. And even in those times, you're gonna be pulling from what's called your mental library. Your mental library is, in short, essentially your experience. It's the library of images, information, all the stuff that you've seen and done in the past collected into your artwork. So a really great example is before I did art, which really wasn't that long ago, I had a pretty poor mental library when it came to visually referencing some content or some information, right? So for instance, let's say clothing, because I'm working on her clothing right now. I knew what clothes looked like, right? I knew what seams were, I knew what stitching was, but I didn't have the very specific knowledge of how these sewing patterns worked up together or how stitches were different from other stitches. Stitches in a pair of jeans might be different than the stitches in another piece of clothing, like a jacket, something real poofy. There's a ton of variety on just stitches alone. But before I ever did art, it was just, yeah, they're sewn together, obviously. They have to be stuck together somehow. But as I started to do art and needed that time where I had to create stitches in 3D for clothing or whatever it was, I had to understand that a little bit more. And over time, I've added to my mental library of stitching specifically, but I've added to my mental library of, a multitude of different things. That's just one tiny little example. So hopefully that kind of clears up the idea of mental library a little bit more. In general, it's this idea of you don't necessarily know what something looks like until you study it and even attempt to create it yourself. So that is some of the most important stuff for that middle ground, because that middle ground involves a ton of little tiny adjustments. That is what sculpting in 3D modeling really comes down to. A lot of really tiny minor adjustments during this middle phase. In the beginning, you're making lots of big strokes, lots of big changes, but as you continue forward into that gray area, it becomes a little bit more difficult to see those big things that need to happen. So over time, you make one small tweak here, one small tweak there, and then 100, 1,000, multiple thousand steps down the line, all of a sudden you have a really big change. And sometimes it's tough to notice those little changes that add up into those big changes. So what I like to do is I will save out a sculpt file, specifically a Z tool. Never save ZBrush projects, those are garbage. So I save what's called a Z tool, and I save that at different phases of my sculpture. So maybe in the first 30 minutes of a block out, I'll save out a version then, I'll work for another 30 minutes to an hour, save out another version, and so on and so forth. So if I'm specifically working on something, for let's say a week or 2 weeks or even a month, then that becomes even more important. So you can take some time to load in an old file, kind of see where you were, where you've come from in that last hour or two, whatever it may be. Sometimes, that distance from week 1 or day 1 to the final product, it's a huge amount of change. And taking the time to look back at that in a little bit of what's called a post-mortem, a larger idea of reassessing kind of your content and skill, you will kind of start to automatically see those areas where maybe you could have improved in speed, improved in, certain techniques. You'll start to remember, hey, I remember creating those eyes in that way. That really didn't work out. Maybe in the future, I could do this in a different technique or a different way. I use that as an example because that is actually one specific thing that I mentioned in a previous Sculptober video. If I'm remembering correctly, I think it was day 7 for the scratch prompt where I sculpted the French bulldog. I was talking about how I did a little bit of this technique for the eyes to begin shaping up some of the form around there, and it ended up being a little bit too convoluted and not really worth my time to break up the form quite to the level that I did in that video. That's something that I'm really enjoying about Sculptober. It's giving me these quick turnaround times for these daily sketches where I can look back and just 2.5 hours later, which is the total amount of time that I spent on this character here, I can turn around and look at this process already and see some areas where I could improve on speed, on some future techniques, or possibly see areas where I did something really well and say, hey, be aware of that and do that again in the future. I wish I could say that there's this magical formula for this middle ground area, but honestly, I really don't think there is. There's such a variety of things that need to happen, and there's such a variety of things you could be creating artwork-wise. Could be a character, it could be a rock, it could be, sky's the limit. So really, I think when people often give this advice, people get a little angry or upset over kind of what sounds like a generalization, and it doesn't seem very helpful, but I promise that it is. And that advice is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Now there are bad ways you can practice, and there are better ways that you can practice. And if you are looking for better ways to practice, I actually created a little bit of a post over on my Twitter account. I'll share a link to this down in the description. I went through a mentorship session with a student that was asking for some additional ways to practice, and I gave them a few assignments and ideas that I thought would really help them. They were things that I did when I was getting into sculpting, and they really helped me progress quickly, and I've kind of refined those ideas over the years. And they're great ways to focus your time more efficiently. Now, I apply these ideas to sculpting, and specifically digital sculpting, but I think that they could be applicable to anything. So if you're looking for ways to get that better practice, get faster, get better at that middle area, be able to see your mistakes, improve your mental library, and improve just your general knowledge of your craft, I recommend checking it out. Again, I'll throw a link down below. And now I wanted to take a little bit of time to answer some of the common questions that have been popping up on these past few Sculptober videos. I say a few, but we're already pretty far into it here. So one of the first really common ones that I've been seeing for people that are interested in learning more is asking about if I have any videos of a full process that's not sped up working on my characters. And the answer to that is yes, and it is completely free here on my YouTube channel. If you just go to my playlists or even on my homepage, I have 3 to 5, I forget how many exactly, playlists of that many characters going through from beginning to end, working on the character, showing every part of the process, talking about it, answering questions. They are from past live streams where people are also asking questions. If you have even more questions, you can ask them there, and I will try to get to as many as I possibly can, but that is where you can find those. I see a lot of questions about my course, the Appeal Academy, the price tag of that, and if there's any way there's going to be a discount in the future. The answer to that, at least right now, is that the course is priced as low as possible. I put a ton of time into the mentorship sessions with each and every student, but I do have some smaller courses over on my Gumroad, gumroad.com/Follygon, showing off a lot of my process techniques. I have one for absolute beginners, and then I have a couple for more middle to advanced sculpting as well. I've seen a lot of questions about how are you doing these so fast? You're putting out so many of these. Are you sculpting in advance? Like, what's going on? Are you working on these for more than one day, etc.? The answer is no. I am doing these every single day. The time on these is completely accurate. I'm speeding each of these videos up at about, I think it's 6 times speed, so 600%. I am also cutting out some of the parts that are things where maybe the sculpt isn't moving, or I'm doing some remeshing really quick with ZRemesher, and it's just loading times, all that stuff. So I cut that stuff out. That's boring. There's nothing even happening on screen. But other than that, I pretty much show you guys the entire process, so you could extrapolate from there. The length of the video times about 6 is pretty much how long I spent on the sculpt. I also, if you don't want to do the math, I put the real time down in the description. So as my channel grows, it becomes more difficult for new artists to wade through my hundreds of videos to find out where they should start. So I made this playlist called, well, Where Do I Start? This includes what I think are my most helpful videos for new ZBrush sculptors. I'm going to put a link down in the description of this video for you guys if you're interested. They're all here on YouTube, so completely free. Additionally, you can check out my quick start guide over on my Gumroad if you're new to ZBrush. That includes some things like some brushes, some materials, and some 3D models and a bunch of other goodies in there. So check it out if you're interested. There's a link down below to my Gumroad, and that's where you can find it. I've seen a bunch of your other questions, and I've been trying to answer as many as I can. I wanted to take just some time here during this video to answer some of the more common ones. If you guys have more questions though, feel free to put them down in the comments. I'll try to answer as many of those as I possibly can. Or if I don't answer you specifically, I'll definitely do something like this again where I answer more during a video. If you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you would like to learn more about digital sculpting, gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my courses, brushes, and materials. Thank you so much for watching. I know we talked a lot of generals in this video. I wanted to switch it up a little. I don't want each of these videos to be exactly the same. In the last one, we talked more about the final steps of the process, and in a future one, we're gonna be talking a little bit more about the early stages, so you can look forward to that. And you can look forward to tomorrow's prompt, which is going to be smell. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.